I work for a commercial cleaning company who specializes in cleaning up rundown, abandoned buildings and getting them ready for refurbishment. We were hired to clean out an old hospital that had been abandoned for some 20-odd years. My team, of which there were 3 of us, was assigned to the behavioral health unit, or more simply, the psych ward. While I was clearing out rooms of dusty old linens and mattress pads, I found an old marble journal tucked under one of the pads. I opened it and flipped through quickly and saw that it was about half filled with journal entries. I thought it was pretty cool, so I slid it in my back pocket so I could read it later and went back to work. Totally forgot about it until I got in the car and drove home. When I got home, I decided to read it, and what I found inside was terrifying, mostly because of the similarities between what was in the journal and what we'd been cleaning up earlier today. I'll go over the connections between what I found in the journal and what I saw today later, but before that, let me share the story. I'm going to try and stay as true to the writing in the journal as possible, so that means some things may be a little misspelled and some grammar might not be perfect. If it's underlined on the page, I'll underline it here. Written all in caps, I'll type it all in caps. So, let's get started. Day 1, 12 p.m. The ER nurse lied to me. She said I could leave after 3 days. The doctor here, though, she said she decides when I leave. She said I won't be out in 3 days. I don't want to be here. I don't belong here. Day 2, 11 a.m. I've been here 24 hours. I don't want to be here. I don't belong here. They do patient checks every 15 minutes. If you're in your room, they knock on the door. They don't care about the time. I can't sleep. They give me my meds and they say that I have mood stabilizers in them for me tonight. I miss Taya. I miss my bed. This is my world now. Day 3, 11 a.m. It's been 42 hours. I'm feeling a little better. I broke down last night. I played some Monopoly earlier and it was a lot of fun. After I broke down, I was given meds to calm me down. I laughed for the first time since coming here. Day 5. I'm okay. I'll be okay. Day 7. It's time to go home. They won't let me leave. I don't know why. I ask and they ignore me. Just want to go home. Day 10. There was a huge boom outside. None of the nurses reacted. They just carried on as normal. All I can see out the window is black smoke. Day 14. We found a nurse in the hallway this morning. He was dead. We've been seeing less and less each day, but since we found him, we haven't seen anyone else. Day 27. There hasn't been a single nurse or doctor or security or anyone at all since we found the nurse in the hallway. The door knocking hasn't stopped, though. Every 15 minutes, if a room door is closed, it will knock. Food still shows up. Meds are still showing up in the medicine window. Day 28. Gerald tried to jump through the window at the nurse's station. Something we couldn't see stopped him and dragged him back out. He was dragged all the way to the quiet room. We hesitantly followed and watched as he was hauled up into a slab bed. We watched the straps wrap themselves around him and tie him down. Then the room door slammed shut. That was this morning. It's almost lights out. We could still hear him screaming. Poor guy. I guess security is still here. Day 32. It's been over a month. We put the body of the nurse in Gerald's room, since he doesn't need it anymore. Gerald's still wrapped up down the hall in the quiet room. He's still screaming. I don't know how. Out the window is just smoke. Large, rolling, jet black columns of smoke, painting the sky a large swath of uncolor. We're still fed. I don't know where it comes from, but it always shows up at the end of the hallway and wheels itself down to us. Day whatever. It's been a while. A lot's happened. A lot of lights have stopped working. The knocking never does. Some of the windows have cracks in them. Don't know how. None of us could even scratch them. There's no more outside. It's just black. The smoke took over the sky weeks ago. I'm really not sure about time. Haven't seen natural light since. We only know days because the lights, what few we have left, dim for a bit every few hours or so. The water stopped getting hot a few days ago. With the lights, the windows, and now the water, it's almost like this place is dying. Gerald stopped screaming eventually. Still strapped down. We can see him moving from time to time, so we know he's alive. Don't know how he survives, but I do know that none of us want to piss off whatever's doing this. Day, I don't even know. We have to get out of here. Doris went into her room and the door closed behind her. It won't open. Something unseen dragged her to the bed and held her there. We watched as the bed made itself with her in it. That wouldn't have been so bad, except that when it was done, Doris was just a red smear between the sheets and the bed. There's not even a bulge where her body should be. She's just gone. The door stayed closed ever since. No one's brave enough to go in their room now. We're all just staying in the day room for now. Been a few days. I lost this book for a bit. It's not that strange. Sometimes stuff just goes missing here. We just assume it's the housekeepers that got it. Strange part is that I found it in Gerald's room, next to the body of the nurse. Now, he's just a semi-wet pile of meat and bones. No idea why that room won't clean itself. Lost a couple other folks to housekeepers. That's what we call what happened to Doris. Maybe we'll try to look in Gerald's room for more stuff we lost. Day after last entry. It was a bad idea. The nurse wasn't dead. I don't know how it could be. It was literally just a pile of meat and bones. And yet, we were in Gerald's room looking for lost stuff. Ron bumped the nurse's body and it jumped at him. It dug its bone fingers into his neck. A wet squelching noise accompanied it every moment. Ron strangled, gurgled, screamed, but he quickly stopped. I'm ashamed to say that we ran. We left him there, with the nurse thing still digging away at his neck. We closed and barricaded the door. Day, I don't know anymore. It's been a few days. I can still hear the nurse thing moving around in Gerald's room. Every now and again we hear wet slaps against the floor. The flies are terrible. Clark got taken by the housekeepers. A window broke out of nowhere. It just shattered. Some of the smoke came in, just a little bit. It's like a creeping miasma. It slithered its way across the ceiling and just sat there. We used a table to block the window and keep any more smoke from getting in. Now we're just watching it. Tay, who cares? We need to leave. Jenny decided to touch the smoke, and it grabbed her like a snake. A thin trail came out and coiled itself around her outstretched arm and down her body and dragged her into itself. It's unthinkable how such a small amount of smoke could consume somebody like that. I say consumed because that's what it did. It ate her. Not all at once, and not quickly. We tried to save her, tried to drag her back down to us. Even with all of us pulling, we couldn't get her to budge. I think I heard something in her pop, or break, or dislocate when we were pulling. But we couldn't save her, so we had to watch. We had to watch as it slowly pulled her into itself. There was no noise, except for Jenny's screeches and screams, but it did eat her, eventually. I don't think I'll ever forget her screams. We stay away from it now. It stays on the ceiling, moving around, but never comes down. We're now living in fear of yet another unexplained thing. Too long. The nurse No idea. Was he ever dead? Was he ever even human? Gerald is not dead somehow, but he's still strapped down. Doris, housekeeping. Aspen, housekeeping. Donald, housekeeping. Ron, the nurse thing. Jenny, eaten by the smoke. Daniel, eaten by the smoke. We're leaving. We've lost too many people to just sit here trying to survive. We've unblocked the window and hopped out. There's a small landing with an access hatch and a half-story below. I'm leaving this book here as a way to ensure that we're not forgotten. If you find this, I didn't live to come back for it. Goodbye. Note: this journal was found in the room of a mental patient who jumped out of his window to his death. I came back. I didn't write that. I don't know who did, but it wasn't me. I found this journal right where I left it. It's just me now. We didn't even make it out of the hospital. I came back because I'd rather die here, where at least I'm taken care of. We were exploring the hospital for about a week, I'd say. This place hasn't changed much. The black smoke is still here. It moves around the ceiling, following me. I feel like it's watching me, like a predator watching its prey. Not actively hunting, but just waiting for any little slip up so it can bag itself an easy meal. It won't be from me. I guess I should explain what happened and how everyone died. When we left, there were still 6 of us. Me, Jules, Richard, Alberto, Gwen, and Ray. I don't know what we expected to find when we left, but there was no way for us to guess what we saw. Narrator's note: the entire next page is full of scribbled out bits. Just woke up from a nap. Something more is going on. I took a nap after writing that last page, and when I woke up, I saw it was completely scribbled out. I didn't do that. I guess something didn't like what I had to say. I can't even remember what I wrote, honestly. I can't remember most of yesterday. This place hurts to be in. Hurts to think about. It just hurts. Good news, though. The food still shows up. It's been 2 days. I guess I'll try again to write down what happened when I left. Outside the window was a small drop down to an access hatch. We quickly filed out and fell down. I couldn't help but notice no more smoke made its way through the window. Even now, sitting here writing this, I don't have the window blocked. Doesn't much make a difference, if I'm honest. There's no weather. There's no wind. Everything is still. I don't hear any animals or bugs. No cars, no people. Just silence. The world is so empty. Back to what happened. We hopped down to the access shaft. We managed to open it and drop down to the floor below. I'd tell you what floor number, but I honestly don't know. When we hopped down, we were in a hallway. It was long and semi-lit. I guess the rest of the hospital was falling apart, just like our unit. Half the lights were either flickering dimly or just out. Still enough light to see what we were going through. The hallway had elevators on one side and a few rooms on the other. The rooms were labeled Radiology 1, 2, 3, and so on. Throughout the entire hallway was a low humming and beeping, the sound of medical equipment left on. Being all too familiar with house cleaning, we didn't dare go into any of the rooms. Gwen wanted to take the elevator, but the rest of us said no. There's no telling what horror that would lead to. Once we got our bearings, we chose a direction and started walking. It was dark. Could barely see the floor. I guess that's why we didn't notice at first. When we did notice, we were too terrified to move. We'd been walking for maybe 10 minutes. The hallway just went on and on. Every now and again we would pass a sign with an arrow and the word visitation on it, pointing the way we were going. Occasionally, we would come to a large intersection with multiple hallways leading off. It was in one of these intersections we noticed what was around us. All over the walls were semi-dark stains, the color of dried blood. Everywhere on the floor we found wet piles of rotting meat and bones. Like our nurse thing. It's amazing how we didn't smell it, but once we noticed, it was all we could smell. It was horrible. Just thinking about it makes me want to puke, even now. Sorry, I had to go throw up. Caught a whiff of the smell. I didn't want to think about where it came from. Richard and Jules, we were stood in the intersection, surrounded by potential monsters. We had no idea how long these things could last like this. Hell, they were literally half rotted. Once we found our nerve, we decided to move on. It's honestly a miracle we hadn't bumped into a pile of them by now. Our luck couldn't last forever, though. In the dark confines of a particularly tight hallway, Richard lost his balance and ended up stepping on a meat pile. It instantly rose up and swallowed him. More an amorphous blob of meat and bones than anything resembling a human. His scream was quick, but loud. Loud enough to wake the dead. Unfortunately, that's not just an expression. Apparently noise also sets them off. Two more of the meat blobs suddenly launched themselves at the closest person. Jules was gone in an instant. The blobs fully enclosed her before she could even scream. Richard was a bit slower. We watched as whatever bones the blob had forced their way into and through him. A long bone through the neck, what looked like maybe fingers digging into his guts, a couple of ribs into his thigh, on and on. We watched in horror for what felt like hours, too scared to move. When he finally stopped moving, we managed to collect our senses and run. Gwen. A few days later, we had moved a few floors down via the staircase. We were never able to take one the entire way. There was always a blockage forcing us out into the hospital proper. Through more halls and rooms, we weren't sure that we could make it out. Gwen was leading us through the hall. She took a turn, and all we heard was the faintest squeak. Then nothing. We waited around the corner for a while before carefully peeking our heads out. About a foot from where the wall turned into a massive wall of black smoke. Floor to ceiling, wall to wall, there was no way through. Gwen must have walked right into it, gone before she even realized it. Poor kid. Ray had the worst fate of anyone, except maybe Gerald. Ray was leading the remains of our group, just Alberto, me, and Ray, through the kitchen. This was about a day after Gwen, and we were walking through the kitchen, past stoves and burners and rotten food. Ray saw something on the counter, I still don't know what, and reached for it. His hand was cut in half, all 4 fingers gone to the knuckle. Next, the skin on his arm was peeled off, like skin on a fish. He watched his arm get sliced into small sections, unable to move. Alberto and I tried to pull him away, but we couldn't. After his arm, Ray was haphazardly thrown onto the counter, and the rest of his body was cut up, prepared like meat at a butcher shop. Saw a few pieces get flung into a pot on the stove before Albert and I ran while the cooking went to work on the rest of Ray. I skipped my meals the next few days after I got back, just in case. Alberto was just unlucky. After what happened to Ray, we decided to go back to our unit. It was all too much. Alberto and I quickly backtracked. A few days later, we found a staircase that said, "To BHU Psych." We were almost back. Running up the stairs, Alberto didn't notice a blob on the next step up. Stepped right on it. Of course, it launched itself onto him. It ended up tackling Alberto over the railing and down into the empty central column of the staircase. They fell, Alberto and the blob. They fell what must have been 10 stories. Of course, we couldn't have been that high up. I watched them tumble down, the blob ripping chunks out of him. Then I noticed what was at the bottom. A roiling, bubbling, almost boiling pool of black smoke. All the way down, Alberto and the blob were plummeting towards it. He fell quietly. The meat blob fell in, and everything was the opposite of silence. How I got back. I guess these things don't like each other. When the meat blob fell into the black smoke, at first there was a blinding light. I can't describe the color. It was beyond white. That's all that comes into my mind when I try to recall what it looked like. Beyond white is the best I can do. With the light came the noise. It was deafening. The sound of flies buzzing so loud I couldn't hear myself scream. I was lucky to open my eyes quickly enough to see the black smoke rocketing up towards me. Quickly threw myself back against the wall as the smoke shot up past me and continued on upwards, filling the central column. I admit it took me longer than I'm proud of to regain control of myself. The light, the noise, the powerful wind from the rush of smoke. It was almost too much. I felt the smoke glaring at me. It was angry. It wanted to eat, but it was hurt. If I was more of an action hero, I would maybe do something with that information. But I'm not. So I ran. I ran up the stairs as fast as I could. I ran through the door marking floor 3. I ran through the halls, following the signs for the BHU, thanking whatever power above that all these doors were unlocked. I crashed through the twin doors leading back to where this all started. I collapsed onto the floor, finally feeling some semblance of safety. I don't know how long I was out for. I only realized after I woke up. All the doors that were unlocked, they all locked behind me as I ran. Now I'm stuck here again. It's been a few days, and I'm alone. Gerald's still here, of course, still strapped down. He's a little more than skin and bones now, but he's still moving. Water's still cold, window's still broken, smoke still follows me, food still rolls down the hall towards me. I did learn something through all of this, though. The realization of false hope is more damaging than no hope at all. So for now, I'll just live here with no hope of getting out. I'll be okay. That's the whole story. Pretty creepy if you ask me. When I was cleaning up earlier today, I noticed the ceiling was smudged with long black smoke stuff. Windows were cracked, with one window leading to an access hatch broken open. In the solitary holding room, I guess that's what they call the quiet room, there was one bed with its straps still tied down. Nothing on the bed, though. Few of the rooms had linen that were completely stained with something. Honestly, couldn't tell you what. Walking through the hospital, I also noticed a lot of stains on the floor. I can't say for certain, but I've had to clean up dead bodies before, and the stains in the hospital looked exactly like the kind of stains a body leaves when it's left to rot for a long time. After reading that, and comparing what happened in the journal with the kind of mess I found, I'm honestly considering calling out tomorrow. Maybe even just calling out for however long it takes to finish cleaning the hospital. I'd been watching Trailer Park Boys when my roommate Alex suddenly barged in through the front door, stumbling over himself as his neck craned to look behind him. I almost dropped my plate of oven-roasted chicken tenders, the Friday meal of kings. "Jesus, Alex, what the hell?" I yelled at him as I turned the TV off. I was pissed that he'd ruined my sublime couch potato meditation, something I'd been cultivating for the past couple of hours. He mumbled expletives, more to himself than to me, as he kicked the door shut, getting up from the floor. Now I was concerned. Alex wasn't the type of person that feared anything. I'd seen him throw hands with guys twice his size, and when the situation called for a fight or flight, he almost always fought. Dumb? Maybe. But scared? Never. "Alex, you okay, buddy?" I asked him, placing my tendies down on the coffee table, trying to figure out if it was a get the baseball bat or call the cops type of situation. He turned around and zoomed past me towards the kitchen. He grabbed a chair and dragged it to the front door as he jammed it up under the doorknob. "Who'd you piss off this time?" I asked. "Shh," he snapped as he gave me a concerned look. "Turn the lights off," he whispered in a ragged breath. I walked to the switch, making sure not to make any loud noises, and flicked it. The apartment became completely dark. "Are you going to tell me what the Shh!" he snapped again, his eyes now turning towards the door. He stood in awkward silence for a few minutes. Finally, his shoulders dropped down, and he walked to the couch and sat down, letting out a low sigh as his tense body started to release itself from the adrenaline armor. I joined him, but I didn't say anything. It was on him to explain whatever was going on. Once he'd calmed down a few more breaths worth, he began to explain. "First, if it sees you, don't flinch. It's smart like that. It knows what's prey, and it'll come after you. Or that's what I think, at least." "What are you going on about? Who came after you? Did you pick a fight again?" "What? What? What came after me? Not who." "Okay, so what is coming after you then?" "I don't know. I saw it in the woods, just like sitting there, looking at me. And then I looked back and sure it was some kind of prank or some neighbor kid or something. Then it turned like upside down and I flinched and then it came at me. I ran here as quick as I could." Sitting so close to him on the couch, I could smell the liquor coming off of him, his scent intertwined with the eau de toilette of man sweat and cheap rum. "Are you drunk?" He said loudly, then glanced at the door and brought his voice down again. "I'm not seeing things. This is real, Zach. It's not a joke." Alex was a hothead when he was sober, but booze basically made him a kiln that would melt steel beams. I needed to calm him down, approach the subject slowly, even if it did ruin my night. He was my friend, right? "Okay, I'm sorry," I said, reeling back, distancing my emotions from the subject. "Where were you?" "Just out by the trail, coming back from the bar." "Okay, and what should we do?" "I don't know. At some point, I stopped looking back. It's so fast, like a cheetah or something. It moved. It was like a circus freak or a dancer or something. It didn't move like humans or animals do. I don't even know how I outran it." He'd started to spiral. I'd seen this before. Whenever Alex got some idea in his head that he couldn't wrap his brain around, he couldn't just leave it. Instead, it swirled around in that thick head of his, scrambling up his mind, vignetting the world. Things of that nature would frustrate him to no end, and I still hadn't figured out a surefire technique to get him to reposition his attention, but I was going to try anyway. "Well, we got the door secured. I don't hear anything outside," I told him, hoping to calm him down a little bit. You sure you didn't hear anything?" "I'm sure, man." "Okay, yeah, thanks." "I need a drink," he said, hopping up from the couch and heading towards the kitchen. After some clattering, he emerged with a frosty bottle of Mexican beer. He turned the lights back on and bent down as he slammed the bottleneck on the edge of the coffee table, sending the metal cap flying across the room in an impressive arc, the work of a seasoned drunk. The bottle reached his lips just before the frothing bubbles began to spill over. He suckled on it like a pacifier, his throat making extraordinary loud gulps as he finished nearly half the beer in one swig. He groaned as he put the bottle down on the coffee table, and burped loudly as he sat down. Just like that, he was back to his old self. "You want to talk about it more?" I asked pensively. "Nah, man, I'm sure it's nothing. Sorry I got you all stressed out. That friggin' thing it looks so weird, he replied, his face as blank as the TV. Yeah, must have been something really messed up. It's alright, I told him. No point dragging out things. Maybe tomorrow he'd want to talk. Want to watch TV or something? Alex didn't say anything. He just stared at the reflection on the black TV screen, his head facing directly forward, his arms limp beside him. Alex? TV? I pestered, but there was no reply. I looked towards where his gaze had sank to see if he was staring at something in particular. At first glance, there was nothing at all. Not even a fly buzzed on the wall. But then, movement from somewhere. For a second, all I could process was that something flickered, changed shape in what I was seeing. But I was unable to piece together what it was. Then it clicked. It was on the TV screen, which reflected us sitting on the couch. Alex's head began to twist, like it was a clock. Except, instead of hands, it was his mouth and eyes and nose that shifted around, turning and turning, pulling his skin and flesh as bones cracked and tendons snapped inside his head. Then he stopped, and where his mouth used to be, there were two bloodshot eyes. Where his eyes used to be, there was a mouth, drooling spit and blood. I couldn't see or say whether he was smiling or smirking or frowning or all of the above. Something happens in the brain when things are upside down, making it harder to process the details. One thing was for sure, though. It was looking at me. I was completely frozen. I could barely feel my legs, and my throat became as dry as a desert. All I wanted to do at that moment was finish off Alex's beer. But I didn't scream or run or throw punches. I just stared at it through the reflection, and it stared at me. After an eternity, the upside-down Alex got up from the couch and limped in front of the TV, blocking it with his body. Its eyes locked on me. And then it started to dance. But not like a real dance, more like an awkward jig. It limped left and right, jumped up and down, its face jiggling as the skin tried to contain its mangled contents. I didn't budge. Alex told me not to flinch. That's all I could think about, and the thought kept me occupied, producing a mental barrier between me and whatever that wretched thing was. After a while, as a sort of last hurrah, I guess, the thing stopped its cursed jig, bent down, and put its face just a few inches away from mine, forcefully breaking my trance. I had to look at it, although it no longer looked at me in a natural sense, because its eyes were closed. Its mouth, it opened its mouth, revealing two eyeballs, still attached to that fleshy cord or something inside. They were held in place by gums, void of teeth, as small puddles of blood filled up the holes where they used to be. The pupils darted around erratically, still functional until they settled their gaze on my eyes. I swear I could see Alex in there, more scared than he had ever been. I felt bad for him. My buddy, my roommate, my friggin' friend, turning him into this thing. Then, gums locked down, squeezed the eyeballs into oblongs, until they finally popped like water balloons, spewing thick chunks all over my face. The urge to move was unbearable, and my own eyes burned as the liquid ooze fell over them. A moment later, the thing opened its mouth again. A muscular, fleshy globule began to slowly emerge from that mouth. It was round and wound in fibrous tendons, and from all its sides produced Alex's yellowed teeth, pointed in all directions, indented directly into the flesh. fleshy blob was so large that the serrated, unkempt teeth scratched and pierced the edges of the mouth as it squeezed itself out, cutting open the lips until gravity finally took hold and it fell to the ground, making a clinky splatter as it collided with the hardwood floor. The thing's face was much smaller without it, anemic in tone. The thing leaned closer and opened one of its eyes. Out of it came the displaced tongue, still dirty and yellow from the rum Alex had drank. It inched closer and closer, until finally it started to lick the eyeball spew off my face. The tongue was warm and slippery, and it twisted around my eyes and my mouth as it licked off every last bit of eyeball left on my face. From somewhere inside the head, where the vocal cords are, I could hear pleasured groans, low and stuffy as they vibrated in between flesh and bone. When the thing finally backed away, I could feel a sticky film begin to coat my face as the spit began to dry. It tickled and irritated my skin, bothering me unimaginably hard. I needed to do something. I'd been stationary for too long, and all the nerves in my body were beginning to fight back with the stillness within. The thing faced me, its tongue sticking out limply from the limp eye socket. I don't know if it could still see me, as it no longer had eyes. I didn't dare flinch, but time was running out. A cramp, a twitch, a punch. Something was going to happen soon. Something needed to break the incubating stagnation. Promptly, the thing turned around and limped its way towards the window. Slowly and awkwardly, like it was losing control of the muscles and nerves within it. It opened it and jumped out. Our apartment's on the 8th floor, so it took a considerable amount of free fall until I heard a wet thud. Even though it was gone, it took me a while until I felt safe enough to move again. When the cops and paramedics came, I tried to explain what had happened. I thought it must be at least somewhat believable. I mean, his face was proof. The way he looked, nothing natural could do that. They just blamed it on the fall, twisted my story to seem like he'd gotten into a drunken psychosis, his state of mind exclusively messed up, and jumped out the window head first, the impact smashing his face to look like that. They brushed off my story completely, condescending to me, saying that I was making a mockery of Alex's death, that I was probably high or drunk or both. But I know that's not what happened. But that's all I really know, and it's not enough for much else. I can't fight this. I can't reason with it. And Alex is gone forever. I'm grateful for being alive, but I'm more scared than ever. I mean, the thing must have died with Alex, right? But what's been chewing at the back of my mind ever since is the fact that I never found that flesh-tooth globule that the thing vomited out. The paramedics and the cops said that they found nothing either, which they mostly used as evidence to disprove my story. Nothing is normal. I'll not be fine. Not anymore. Everything feels tawdry and cheap, no matter what kind of meaning or purpose I think my life used to have. Well, that's all gone now. Reverberated away like a beautiful song sung into the wind. It can only travel so far before it dims into nothing. This is my life now. I'm on the cusp of accepting it. It's only a matter of time until I'm all used up. With my new purpose fulfilled, I'll move on. The cycle will continue. Whatever it's done with me, I'll be like one of them. Just one more of them. That's the only part I can't accept. No matter my denial, I know it's inevitable. I grew up wanting to be a singer, to create something temporary and beautiful with little more than a breath and a piece of my soul merged into it. It was my dream. I wanted to be able to move people with the sound of my words, to make them feel genuine emotion by vibrating my vocal cords in a manner that brought feeling, whether it was joy, elation, intrigue, even sadness. I grew up listening to the great opera performers and envying their talent, their dedication, to convey so much feeling. It's as if they're feeling that emotion themselves, completely and fully, so fully that it overflows out and infects those within earshot, causing them to feel as well. I don't envy them anymore. Since my run-in with the worms, I now have that gift, except the things I infect with my audience are sinister. I can only express what the worms feel. You don't want to feel what the worms feel. They say that due to the way their nervous system is developed, or rather lack of developed, worms can't actually feel anything. They're annelids, possessing no brain, with a single nerve cord running through the length of their body. Scientists think that because of this, they can't feel pain. They can't think. Their primitive anatomy would have them believe that they're mindless little decomposers, their only purpose to consume and convert old dead things into nutrient-rich waste. Little organic fertilizer machines. I wonder how those same scientists would feel if they could see what I had, if they could hear me sing the worms song. They would feel how everybody else feels when they hear it. It cannot be put into words. For worms, they don't have any words, but the effect of it is undeniable. To dissect the feeling and pick it apart would be an exercise in futility, a lesson of hubris. The results would be irrelevant. Thinking back to that day, I wonder what my life would be if I had never stumbled into that hole. If my friends had never invited me hiking at the base of that gargantuan mountain, or had I made up excuses as to why I couldn't go, my life might be different, might be normal. Had I never decided to stray from the well-beaten path and fallen into that hole, I might have been able to fulfill my dream of becoming an opera singer eventually on my own, not with the creature's perpetual curse infecting my larynx, coiling its way around my trachea. Had I never went to investigate that gorgeous siren song that, in truth, was a swan song, I may have lived a life full of life experiences instead of cursed half-life I'm now burdened with. The worm's head worming its way up my epiglottis like a charmed cobra every time I sing. Had I not screamed when I was face to face with those half-rotten corpses, surrounded and wedged into the bottom of that chasm by the petrified remains, then perhaps one of them wouldn't have slithered its way down my throat so easily. All the cadavers' mouths hung open as the demon worms sang their beautiful and deadly chorus from what was left of their hosts, their heads poking through the open throats of rotten flesh. Had I not chickened out of ending my own life once my new parasite made its intentions known, maybe the worm's tendrils wouldn't be worming their way deeper and deeper into my brain right now. My dream of becoming famous is now my nightmare, because I know once I'm on that stage, hundreds of eyes and ears on me, the worm will sing her misbegotten song. Chaos will erupt. Maybe not at first, perhaps not for a long time, but once the notes go into their ears, then eventually they will belong to the worms. It takes time for a flower to bloom, just like it takes time for a corpse to decompose. But once it starts, there's really no stopping the process. The children of the worms gestate, being born from the mere sound alone. The seed is planted, the egg is laid. When they finally hatch, they will feed on the various blood and cerebrospinal fluids that they need until they mature, at which time they begin controlling their gracious host. Little things at first. They have to learn how to walk before they can run, after all. It may start with the twitching of a limb, the spasm of a muscle. Once they further develop, simple spasms and twitches become more refined, the kicking of a small animal, the slapping of a coworker. When they're closing in on the end of their life cycle, they have full control, the murder of a friend, the mutilation of a loved one. When they're nearing the end, having lived a full and productive life, they find somewhere secluded, usually somewhere isolated, but with a great chance of being heard. Their siblings, who were all born from the same song, or what's left of them, began to congregate, usually in clusters of about a dozen. With their help, they began digging a hole. It's deep, just wide enough to accommodate the cluster of their host bodies, with room for one unsuspecting victim in the middle. The shaft, oddly acoustic in its properties. They crawl in and they wait. They wait while their hosts slowly decompose. They wait to be taught how to sing. They wait for Mother to come and teach them. With their mother's dying song, they learn. Only one at a time will get to go on and continue with their own life cycle, to infect another host so it too can sing for the world. I know all of this because the worm wants me to know. It wants me to understand, in hopes that with understanding would come some sense of the grand purpose, to know that my death won't be in vain. I've been under the control of the worm for some time now, and have become an observer of my own life. The mother worm, the one that sings to create its children, doesn't start out in the brain like its kids do, and doesn't indulge in violence. It nests in the esophagus of its hosts, and with time, grows little tendrils that invade the sinus cavities, eventually making its way to the brain. Because of this, it takes longer to reach its final stage of life, and therefore longer to take full control of its host. There are still brief periods where I resume control, and I write this during one of those, snippets of clarity that grow shorter and shorter every time. Before the worm had any control, after I was rescued from that god-awful pit, I found that my singing voice had improved exponentially. I could hit vocal ranges that I never dreamed I'd be able to master, much less even accomplish successfully. My voice was sublime, utter perfection. I used my newfound skills to seize my dream of getting leading role after leading role, my fame and accolades growing with each performance. As my fame grew, so too did the influence of the worm, branching deeper and deeper. This evening's performance will be televised, and I plead with you, do not view it. The worm almost has complete control, and tonight's performance will be the inseminating one. Never has a worm gotten to sing its impregnating song to such a large audience, and I fear all of the chaos and murder it will cause down the line. I want to kill myself, to end it all, but the worm has enough control over me now, even in my brief waking spells, to stop me every single time. I need to hurry. I can feel it waking again. If, by some miracle, the worm doesn't find and delete this, please, for the love of everything I hold dear, don't listen to my voice. It's not really me. It's the Requiem of the worm. I want them to die. Her voice was little more than a whisper in the still air. There were no more tears, but the tracks were there, catching the moonlight on her skin. The blood had dried black on her swollen lips. I should have stopped her. I thought about it then, and I think about it now. This was how it began. It was the night of my 10th birthday, July 9th, 1991. The last of the party guests were leaving, family and friends, and ones and twos into the late summer night. I'd said goodbye and snuck into the back garden to play with my new football. We lived near the coast, so the taste of salt was on the air, a stiff breeze off the water cutting through the heat. Upstairs, my younger brother was playing on the computer. Downstairs, my parents were tidying up and starting dinner. A figure in the distance caught my eye, dark hair tied back, walking fast through the long grass and into the woods. It was a girl I recognized from school, Katie Bridges. We were good friends, but she hadn't come to my party, despite being invited. It wasn't really a surprise. Everyone knew how she struggled to get along with other kids. I had plenty of friends, but it often seemed like I was her only one. I watched her until she disappeared into the tree line. Where could she be going alone, I thought. There was nothing out there but hills and forests. "Mom," I shouted, "I'm going to Katie's, back in an hour." The lie was easy, and I thought harmless. I took off before anyone could reply to stop me. Spinning through the gate and across the grass, I caught up with her in minutes. Katie glanced over her shoulder when she heard me coming. She saw me, but kept on walking. "Go away, Kieran. Leave me be." "Can't let you go alone," I replied, voice filled with the confidence of youth. I couldn't imagine that anyone wouldn't want company. "So where are we going?" I asked, jogging at her side. It was just another afternoon adventure for me. "Nowhere," she said, turning to face away. "Anywhere. Away." That's when I saw she was hurt. A bruise was forming around one eye, a deep cut on her lip, too, which she was trying to keep me from seeing. Blood on her sleeves and the back of her hand where she had wiped it away. I knew what had happened. Her mother had hit her again. Maybe her father, too. It was equally likely to be either of them. I didn't say anything. I knew from experience that she didn't like to talk about what happened. Still, there was a swelling in my chest to say or do anything that might help. She was my friend, wasn't she? But what could I do? In truth, I had no idea. I passed a few moments in awkward deliberation, biting my lip as I kept pace alongside. The least I could do was stay with her until she calmed down, I told myself. Then walk her home. So, on we went in silence. She wouldn't speak to me, despite my best efforts to enrage her or raise a smile. We walked for a long time, and I started to worry about getting back. I remember thinking it was strange that we hadn't reached the beach. What direction were we going? I had never thought the forest went on that far. It felt as if we were going downhill, too, which made no sense at all. Still, on she marched, eyes down and arms folded, me tagging along and growing increasingly nervous. The trees grew denser, the space between them darker. I looked up to see the sky was now overcast, felt the air growing cold. Katie hadn't seemed to notice any of this, or if she did, she hadn't cared. Just as I was about to suggest turning back, the forest thinned, and I saw a clearing ahead. We stepped into it together, a small hollow in the rolling hills, ringing the pale trees with bare branches. There was a stone well in the center, maybe 3.5 feet tall and 5 wide. Behind it rose a wooden statue of an angel with wings outstretched, hands folded in prayer, hooded face looking down. We'd both stopped. It was so still and quiet. I could hear us breathing. Overhead the clouds rolled past, an ocean of gray stretching as far as I could see. "What is this place?" I asked. Have you been here before?" She didn't reply, but I could tell by her eyes that she hadn't. We moved closer, dry grass breaking under our footsteps. I saw the sides of the well were mossy and worn with age. There were other pieces of old stone strewn about, half-buried remains of some ancient ruin. The angel itself was damp with rot and badly split. Many of the carved feathers had fallen from the wings and lay in the grass. "It's a wishing well," said Katie, walking slowly to the edge. Her eyes were glassy, her voice little more than a whisper. I tried to peer inside without getting too close. "Got a penny?" I asked, forcing a smile as I spoke. The place was scaring me, but I didn't want to show it. There was no face under the angel's cowl, just dark wood, yet I was certain it looked whichever way I moved. Katie had placed her hand on the stone, staring down into the dark. I saw her take a penny from her pocket and hold her hand out over the well. That's when she spoke those words, quiet but clear. I want them to die. My parents. I wish they were both dead." She dropped the coin, and we watched it fall. A spark of light caught on the metal as it turned. A piece of the sky snatched into the dark, pulled down to vanish in the silence below. There was a flash of wind, a feeling like we had plunged into icy water. I gasped for breath, shaking with the fear that had grown in me since we had arrived. We shared a look and turned to run together, side by side, back the way we had come. The sun came back out as we returned, but it still felt like we'd been gone for hours. I recall expecting a rollicking when I got home, but no one said a word. When I burst into the back gate, my brother was still playing on the computer, my parents still tidying and sorting dinner. I checked the clock and found that I'd been gone less than 30 minutes. Had I misread the clock? "That was quick," my mom said as I came in. "Pity Katie couldn't come today. Is she all right?" She gave me a look that said she knew about Katie's problems. Everyone in town did, but nothing ever changed. "Yeah, she's okay," I replied. I didn't tell anyone where I'd been with Katie, what we saw, what was said. Not then, not ever. Katie was woken up that night around 2 a.m. The house was quiet, but she could feel that something was wrong. She sat up in bed and stared at the door. There was a pull in her thoughts, a call, telling her to come and look. She crept out into the hallway and peered downstairs. All the doors were closed. She took the first step down, listening. She would be in trouble if her parents caught her out of bed, but she couldn't resist any more than she could resist breathing. There was something down there she knew, something she had to see. There was a little light in the living room, but nothing made a sound. She held her breath and opened the door. Katie's father sat very still and gray, eyes open and staring. Her mother lay motionless beside him, face down on the carpet. They had both been dead for hours. That's how she told me it happened. There were other stories, but I never wasted time with them, and neither did the police. The local paper said the two had heart attacks. Katie was taken by her grandmother, a chain smoker in her 60s who had only met her once since she was born. I never learned the details, but Katie's parents had fallen out of touch with the rest of her family. Still, she was a kind lady and did everything she could for the girl now in her care. Her own house had been a tiny one-bedroom, so she put it up for sale and moved in with Katie until she could find somewhere suitable. The town pried and watched and gossiped, from the old ladies down to my school friends. It wasn't right, but anyone who's lived in a small town knows how poisonous they can be. I didn't see Katie again until a few weeks later. Her grandmother hadn't let her out of her sight since she arrived. She came over for lunch, then the two of us sat in the garden. My mom brought us some drinks and tried not to fuss over my friend. Katie waited for my mother to be out of earshot before speaking. "We need to go back," she said. I told another white lie to my mom, said we were going to Katie's, as her gran didn't want her away too long. Once we were out of sight of my house, we turned towards the trees, taking the same path we had the night of my birthday. We walked for almost an hour, but couldn't find anything. We kept ending up on the beach, no matter which route we took. Katie wanted to keep looking. She was desperate, and I understood why. But I didn't really want to go back either. That place had terrified me, but I couldn't say no to her. So we searched, back and forth over the same ground, until we were filthy and exhausted. We searched until we knew we would be in trouble, and even then, she didn't want to go back. She finally gave up when the sun was going down. We took a seat on one of the hillsides that overlooks our homes. She'd been crying, and I hadn't noticed. "Can't tell anyone," she said, "about what happened, about the wish I made." She was looking down at the ground to hide her face, a tremor in her voice. "Please, Kieran, promise me, not ever." I didn't hesitate. "I promise," I said. I can touch on this memory only lightly. It's a delicate thing, fragile and perfect, a ghost in glass. I see us sat side by side, gentle clouds above the warm grass below. The only sounds were the distant waves, a rolling whisper in dusk's tender hush, two children alone at the edge of town, dirty hands and secrets, eyes alive in the sunset light. In the weeks that followed, I tried to forget that place, the angel and the well. As enticing as the mystery was, I couldn't deny I was still frightened. Some things were better left in the dark. Unfortunately, it wouldn't be that easy. 2 months after his death, the grave of Katie's father was dug up and the body was taken. The same night, her house was burnt down with her grandmother inside. They found Katie in the street, alone, catatonic with shock. I remember that night. The sound of the fire trucks woke me up, blue lights flashing as they passed. I got up and went to the window. Where Katie's house had been was the flickering light of fire above it, and black on black as the smoke fell against the sky. My breath fogged the glass, and I wiped it away. Behind me, my father was entering the room, and I hadn't even noticed. He put his hands on my shoulder, but neither of us spoke, just watched. I could hear the sounds of the blaze by then, tearing and eating the building away like a giant animal come to life in flame. I saw the silhouettes of firemen, saw an ambulance arrive. The beast roared and the roof came down, swallowed into the blaze below. Then my father snatched me up, turning me away from the window, and holding me tight like he hadn't in years, arms wrapped around as if he could keep me safe from all the hurt that waited in the world. No one seemed to know the truth of what had happened or why. A veil of secrecy had quickly dropped over the events, which was understandable. The local police, who had never previously been shy of chat and gossip, were suddenly tight-lipped. Even the mention of the Bridges family name drew dark looks. As for Katie, she was taken into social care, as she had no remaining family. This meant she had to move into the city, as our small town had not so much as a post office. It was all people talked about, though it seemed to me they cared more about the drama than the girl herself. I actually heard people say she was cursed. They said it like it was a little joke under their breath, like it might actually be true, and they were afraid to face it. Even my mother, who always had a soft spot for Katie, began to speak about her as if she was something dangerous, as if misfortune was contagious, as if the scared little girl who had come crying to our door when her father broke her arm was better off gone, best forgotten. I remembered looking at the burnt remains of her house on the way to school, seeing where the roof had collapsed in over her bedroom, and wondering where my friends slept now. Even months later, as autumn faded into winter, people couldn't help but stop and stare when they passed, at the boarded windows and the black scars left by the flame, at the pools of rain and fallen leaves scattered amongst the rubble. The tragedy of it all seemed to have a pull on the whole town, something we couldn't leave behind, the cold ash heart of us. I stayed in touch with Katie, despite what people thought and said. My father took the letters I wrote and posted them for me. He never said it out loud, but but I think he admired the loyalty to my friend. He and my mother argued over it more than once. I recall listening from my room, ears to the door, but I heard him say to her, "It's up to the boy. I won't have anyone tell him otherwise." I didn't see Katie face to face again until we were in our 20s. She came back to our town and found a job, rented a flat, said she felt like this was her home. It had always been her plan to come back, she told me, through children's homes and foster families. She always knew she would return. We managed to remain friends, but it wasn't the easiest to find time for each other. I had college, a part-time job, family, and a close-knit group of friends. They all seemed wary of her, especially the ones who remembered her from childhood. As time passed, Katie built herself a life, working hard and taking her chances when she got them. Within a few years, she started studying law at the closest university. I was so happy for her. I remember meeting her every few months for drinks, my measly life updates paling in comparison to her own. When I was 23, I was driving to the airport with my girlfriend, Hazel. We'd been seeing each other on and off for a few years. Then in the last month, we had moved in together. A driver in the opposite lane lost consciousness at the wheel, swerving in front of us. It happened too fast for any real thought, just a split-second reaction. I remember Hazel's voice. We were talking about the flight times. Then seeing the other car cut across us, a flash of the other driver slumped in his seat. The impact, blurred lights and colors, the car spinning and turning over, and then another crash as we came to rest in the tree. When I opened my eyes, we were upright, surrounded by greenery. I could hear people shouting nearby. The side of my face was wet, and there was broken glass in my clothes and hair. As my head cleared and I saw the blood sprayed across the window, saw other small white pieces on my lap. There were teeth and parts of bones. None of the blood was mine. When we hit the last tree branch, it had come through the passenger side window, striking Hazel's jaw and killing her instantly. I'm trying, but these are only words, you understand. There are limits to what I can convey with them. Regret, guilt, pain, loss, all these things, and how I hate myself for feeling them when I survived and she didn't. I can't explain it. Hazel's funeral was the hardest day of my life. I'd never really experienced tragedy before. All my family and friends were healthy and well. Katie's parents were the closest I had been to death. People blamed me, and I knew it. It wasn't right, but they did. I'd been driving, and I'd walked away without a scratch. They would never say it out loud, but it was all over them. They stank of it. I saw it in their eyes, the way they held themselves, the silence between words. My parents and brother were there for me through it all, but there was only so much they could do. You can't shield someone from all the hurt in the world, no matter how tight you hold them. Afterwards, I told them I wanted to be alone, and they reluctantly obliged. I drank myself stupid, drank until it boiled over, screaming at the walls of the unfairness of it all. At sunset, I pulled on a coat and walked out into town. It was late autumn and raining heavily, but I didn't care. I knew where I had to go, into the forest by the coast, a coin in my hand. I was looking for a way to fix things, the only way I could think how. I walked the path myself, as Katie had when we were 10, through the woods and between the hills, head down and wrapped in pain, battered by wind and rain, desperate, crying out inside for a way to make it right. I didn't notice when the rain stopped, when the air had grown still. It was the trees that caught my attention, those skeletal branches. I stopped. In the failing light, I could see only hills and valleys, forest in all directions. Yes, I thought, this is the way. I put my head back down and kept walking, marching on until the trees parted at last. There it was ahead of me, after all these years. Nothing had changed in all that time. The old stone well, the pale trees, the angel with the hidden face. I thought I could make out the footprints of 2 children in the dirt and leaves. Thought you might be here. I spun around in fright to see Katie, breathing hard, hand on knees. She was soaking wet, wiping strands of hair from across her face. Couldn't let you go alone, she said. The words seemed frozen for a moment, a pause as the pain of the last week rushed up on me. Then the dam broke, and I stumbled forward, melting into her arms. All the strength left my body, and I sunk to the ground in tears. If you've ever felt like this, you'll understand. When it all comes out, and you don't care anymore who sees or hears. I know why you're here, Kieran, she said. It won't work. What? How do you know? I was still drunk, I realized, slurring my words. 'Cause I tried. My father, I made a wish here to bring him back, months after he died. But it wasn't him, Kieran. It wasn't my father I brought back. The pull woke me in the middle of the night, just like before. The urge to go into the dark and see. When I went downstairs, it was there, in the house, sitting where he had sat, rotting flesh and hollow eyes. It didn't have any teeth. The stomach was bloated. The smell nearly made me vomit. It had already killed my grandmother. I saw her body on the floor. Her face was cracking, brittle with the memories of her childhood. Then it saw me. It looked at me, Kieran, with those empty eyes. It tried to speak, to say my name. When it got up, I panicked. I locked myself in my grandmother's room. It was trying to get in the door. I knew I had to fix it. I had to fix the thing I had done. So I used a lighter and lighter fluid from her room and started a fire. Then I climbed out the window, went back to the front door and locked it inside. I didn't know what to say to her. Sat on the cold, dusty soil. Her confession had cleared my head. I don't know how it works, this place. She got to her feet. It isn't always here. You have to want something. Want it more than anything else in the world. It had to be at sunset. You can't look where you're going. You have to keep your head down. I don't know everything you can wish for. Only some of the things you can't. You can't turn back time or make something out of nothing. You can't change. She paused, looking through the trees. You can't change yourself. How many times did you try? I asked. I don't know. Maybe half a dozen before the night of the fire. I was a child, alone, with the weight of those things. It was hard to stay away. Sorry I didn't tell you, Kieran. I wanted to make it right. I thought of her back then, a 10-year-old girl, life slipping through her fingers. I had no idea what it must have really been like. I know how you're hurting, she said. I know it as well as anyone can. But this isn't the way. You don't want that for her. What happened to my dad? He wasn't a good man, but he didn't deserve that. What I did to him. I rubbed a fallen feather between my fingers, the soft wood breaking apart in my fingers. I knew she was right. This place is evil, Kieran. We both know it. It's a trap for desperate souls. When I came back to this town, I didn't know if I could find it again. But now that I have, I know it should be destroyed. We should destroy it and never come back, so no one else can be poisoned by it. So we did. We smashed the well to pieces, dropped the stones down into the dark, not one ever making a sound. When that was done, we covered the hole with hundreds of broken branches stripped from the trees. It must have taken us hours. Last, we pushed over the statue. It took both of us, rocking it back and forth until it finally tipped. It broke into pieces as it hit the ground, each rolling away into dust. We didn't look back, just left together in silence. When we reached sight of home, we parted without a word. I had nightmares for months afterwards, something I never suffered from before or since. I would wake up screaming, not knowing who or where I was. The things I saw in those dreams have never left me. A faceless girl floating on a bottomless ocean, body tattooed with dark words and symbols. There are hands just beneath the surface, thousands, millions of them reaching for her. Then, angels in a cold desert, surrounding a pit of earth. They pull each other's bodies apart and drop the pieces into the silent void below. They're screaming, but no sound comes. Only the parts of them falling, always falling, tiny lights vanishing into nothing. I didn't see Katie in the months that followed. It wasn't her fault, but she brought back too many difficult memories. I moved away from the town for several years, but could never settle. One morning, I woke up simply knowing that I had to go home. I had to be with my family and friends. My brother's wedding wasn't long after I returned. I saw Katie at the reception that night, sat alone on the steps outside the venue, champagne in one hand and a cigarette in the other. Despite her success, she still wasn't great at making friends. She turned to see me as I walked towards her. We hadn't spoken in years, but she smiled, took my hand to help her up. Then we were face to face, alone in the moonlit night. The sound of music and dancing inside seemed to melt away until there was only us, together. We kissed, wrapped in night and each other, as if from nothing. My life changed in that moment, finding something I never knew I needed. We spent the night together, then another. We moved into my flat the next month, and we were both engaged in the weeks after that. No one approved, but it didn't matter. We had never let each other go, not really. Even when the world didn't want her, I always did. I believed I had a lesson to learn, to realize what you have and hold it close. Everyone has hopes and fears. Everyone has their wishes and their demons. Can you hear yours now? Do you listen to what they say? Some can give you hope and drive you on. Some fill your heart with the things you've lost or will never have. The trick is to learn which are which. I need to skip on years again. So many it makes me feel old to write it. The world has started to feel shallower as I age. Smaller, narrower. There's less color, I think. Katie has a wonderful career. We have a beautiful home together and a good life. I'm her husband, though I sometimes wonder what else. Somewhere along the way, I lost my ambition and drive. I've been feeling uneasy for a long time now. It's been growing beneath the surface of our lives. Last night, I couldn't shake it. Couldn't get my thoughts away from it. I sat staring at the door. A pull in my chest, something telling me to come and look. Katie had told me she was going to meet a friend for a few hours. She often did, and I'd never thought anything of it. It was sunset. On the horizon, great clouds rolled in from the ocean, dark giants embracing the land. I followed her footsteps in the mud, though I didn't need to. I knew where I was going, driven by fear like a fire in the night. I walked on, head down. The air grew still and quiet, the trees thin and pale. I saw it ahead of me, the hollow, the well, the statue, standing just as they had when I'd first laid eyes on them. A path was worn into the dry grass. Katie was still there. She sat on the edge of the well, looking down into the black. "Knew you would figure it out eventually," she said. Now that I had arrived, I didn't know what to say. I couldn't stop trying to make things better, but I made mistakes I couldn't fix. It was like a fire I couldn't put out. I stood there in the dust, hearing the truth I already knew. There were no twists or tricks or hidden evils. I got exactly what I wished for every time, and it ate me away. Now nothing's right, nothing's clean. Everything I have left is poisoned by it. I'm empty. Can't you see, Kieran? Everything I have is worthless." She looked me in the eyes, and I could see it at last. All the years of lies and fear. I could never fix my mistakes, no matter how hard I tried. I wished my father would come home. I wished for people to notice me, to care about me, but all I did was make them hate me. I wished... Her voice cracked, and she hung her head, closed her eyes. Tears rushed down her cheeks and fell into the darkness. So many wishes for things I wanted ended up hurting people. I wanted you. I always wanted you. So I wished that you would love me. But it isn't real, is it? Because you never had a choice. So it isn't really you. And now, it could never be real. And that's my fault, too. She didn't look at me. Didn't even open her eyes. She just pushed forward and was gone, vanishing into the silence of the night below. I should have stopped her. I thought of it then, and I think of it now. That was how it ended. Now I long for something lost. There are no answers in this pain, no truth to find. It's just another broken piece of many. I close my eyes, and here she is. Eyes and voice and lies and fears. How much of my life was my own? Which decisions were forced upon me by the wishes she made? Did I have no choice in the woman I loved? If I can't trust myself, then what remains of me? What is left to believe in? I know she didn't need to make that wish. She didn't need to ask for something that was already hers. All she had to do was tell me, because I've always loved her, and I always will. Whatever's after this life, I know she still needs me, so I know what I have to do. I can't let her go alone. Throughout my childhood and young adulthood, I would often travel with my parents and become immersed in the remaining pristine lands of this country. These adventures ranged from alpine hiking in the Rockies to treks through the maroon badlands of the Southwest, and even the dense, verdant hills of Appalachia. Of course, life and lousy people are the bane of any person's simple existence. When my now former boss decided to cover her ass by picking me as the unwilling sacrifice, thus unraveling yet another chapter in my chaotic book of life, I packed it in and found a spot to start over. With a little help from my savings and mostly supportive family, I figured that I may as well live in as heavenly a place as possible while going through hell. So I settled on Ohio's forested hill country. Nestled within some of the most pastoral farmland still left in the country, I found myself a quaint rental in a two-street town that itself sat outside of a proud national forest preserve. That great land of woods, rivers, and hills could even rival its most well-known and deeper Appalachian cousins to the south and east. Better still, it was comparatively less visited, making it a prime spot for me to trek through on my off days. I was more than a bit out of practice and out of shape, but I picked back up on the lessons I'd learned in my younger years in the wilderness quick enough. Those first few hikes were tough, but I talked to a few park employees and rangers before my initial venture to ensure that I wasn't going to get myself on a 411 podcast the hard way. In fact, there was one especially cute ranger who wore her hat just crooked enough for it to be intentional. One I was working up the nerve to ask out for a coffee date, when my newfound paradise turned into a nightmare. I figure at a certain point that a solo weekender in the more dense region of the wilderness would be the ultimate remedy to my mental ailment. A nagging voice in the back of my head began whispering otherwise, but I figured that was my anxiety rather than instinct. Hell, it started out fine. I had more than the necessary supplies, a clear route planned, and 2 people, including said ranger, who knew my plans and my desired endpoint. While I wasn't such a fool to figure that nothing could go wrong, I figured if I was careful and patient on the trail, at least nothing catastrophic would happen. Then, I got myself lost. I don't know quite when it happened, but I know how it happened. Some goofed up combination of my GPS battery system failing me, and not checking the trail map enough, going off trails to make camp in the dark, and my own jacked up headspace that I'd been ignoring for months now. After the initial panic hit, I did my best to calm the what-ifs and remember my training. Get to the nearest elevated point, get my position, and get on a marked trail. I did just that, and saw that I wasn't as far off as I'd feared. In fact, I came across what looked almost like a game trail, if not for the slight indents of human-like prints smattered the damp earthen floor. Not stopping to wonder why those footprints were barefoot, my only concern was connecting with a main trail and hopefully finding other people. With a renewed sense of confidence, I proceeded on down the game trail. I still had that positive outlook in mind when I heard the first howls. Well, howls are putting it mildly. They were more like some wicked amalgamation of roars of bears and the yowls of big cats. The thing that wigged me out a bit at first was that black bears typically strove to avoid human contact, and the Appalachian cougar was either extinct or at best barely existent. Plus, I had a few defenses up my sleeve in the form of bear spray and my prized Glock 20 that my old man had gifted me the day I'd taken my first solo trip, years ago now. If the concentrated capsaicin spray didn't deter some forest beast, 10 millimeters of jacketed hollow point surely would, though every part of me hoped it wouldn't come to that point. I'd almost take a mauling over having to kill one of those wonderful endangered creatures. The fact that the howling sounded like multiple creatures at once, yet none that were distinctly identifiable, led me to make camp earlier than normal that afternoon. If there was a bear or a rogue lion nearby, the best action I could take at that point would be to do my due diligence in finding a proper site for the night, and head out bright and early. After finding a decently open spot away from the dense vegetation or food sources, I set up camp and separated a cooking site. All the while, I lit a few hays and hoes of my own to alert whatever animal might be near to mind each other's spaces. The part of the strange cries that made me freeze in the middle of my dinner of rehydrated beefy mac was, aside from how they seemed to be creeping ever closer, that the harder I listened, the more the guttural howls, grunts, and yelps seemed to sound like words. Human words. Nigh unintelligible words, albeit clear intonations and constants that few animals can make or mimic. Even cougars, which could sound like a female or a baby crying out in distress, don't actually form words. Could be crows, I briefly thought, as I packed away my smellies in a bear canister. The thought calmed me for a few moments till I shook my head, remembering that even crows could hardly make such deep, nasty tones. Now, at a total loss as to what was in the woods with me, I figured that I wasn't going to get much sleep that night. I didn't even dare build a fire for fear of attracting rather than dissuading whatever might be out there amongst the vast expanse of trees. As the darkest hours of the night began to weave their web of paranoia, I took refuge in my tent, and some solace in my none too measly defenses. It was not so much if something was out there watching me, but rather the unknown of what it could be, if not a typical member of the local fauna. Having resolved to wait the night out and hike out in the morning, I was thankful at least that the skies were clear as forecasted. The eternal swath of celestial bodies made for a much more pleasant canopy than my rainfly. As I lay on the sleeping pad trying to recall what my father had taught me about identifying the constellations, my eyes grew heavy as they did when the serotonin of peace finally replaces many minutes of panic. That, coupled with the nearly 3 days of continuous trekking, was now threatening to overtake my fear for control over my body's natural inclinations. The gentle stillness of the forest only exacerbated that feeling. Wait a minute. Stillness? In these woods? Even in those deepest hours, it was hardly ever silent. The lack of chittering or the occasional flying squirrel, the huffing of skunks, and the hooting of the barred owl were noticeable. That realization hit me just as the first spear tore through my tent. For a few minutes I sat there stupefied, not even registering what the hell was happening, until 2 more crude weapons sliced through the canvas. One of them narrowly avoided burying itself in my skull. I wasn't 3 times lucky, however, and the last thrown spear bit deeply into my left bicep. Even as I was thrown on my back from the impact and shocked from the bolt of white-hot pain, my brain didn't register that I was under attack till the same bastardized caterwauling from earlier returned, although now it was less of a call and response and more like the war cry of the Devil's Own Legion. I grabbed my backpack from my prone position in the tent, throwing it over me in a desperate attempt for cover as a final pair of spears tried to find their mark. I was just quick enough to get the pack up on my chest as one of those fierce weapons ripped into the nylon instead of my flesh. The war whoops and animalistic roars were nearly on top of me now. I figured that staying in my tent surely meant death, so still holding my speared backpack, I burst through the shredded side. Right as I freed myself, I fell sideways and down into the forest floor with a rough jerk. Christ alive, what now? The damn spear had caught on a torn flap and tripped me up. Oh God, I'm a dead man. I'm a dead man, I thought, now seeing a pair of wild-looking humanoids approaching out of the brush with wicked gleams in their fierce orange-yellow eyes. As the large figure approached, I began to be able to make out some of their features in bright gleams of the moonlight. They were indeed huge, relative to even my 6-foot linebacker frame. Even in that pale, dim light, I could tell their great size. The bastards seemed thick with hair, too, far from what anyone could be. But it was those terrible yellow eyes and snarling visages that made me realize I was most assuredly not dealing with any ordinary humans. I heard soft pattering to my left and another on my right. More of these things were flanking me, toying with me, like they'd done this before. Not knowing whether they wanted to kill me or eat me or do something even more gruesome than my own mind could conjure in that moment, I resolved to at least die with my boots on. When I had fallen, by yet another miracle, my pack had spilled a few of its contents that had been stopped in place by my body. Chief among them was my father's 10mm and my own maglite. With a maniacal grin, I exploded into movement in a way that one can only when they're dealing with their own grim demise. My slashed arm arced with the swing and sent streaks of pain up through my body as the maglite connected brutally with the strange humanoid's arm. Howls of pain erupted as that and at least one of my bullets found its mark. Having bought myself a few minutes, I pushed upright and back a few yards against a massive tree fall, smacking the maglite button on. Part of me even now wishes that I hadn't witnessed the true forms of what hunted me that night. The maglite's powerful beam revealed what the full moon could not. These things, they were human, sort of, but also something else entirely, something more. They stood bipedal and tall, as I already discerned, but what I had first thought to be bunches of excess hair was actually thick but surprisingly well-kept fur of various brunette shades covering almost every square inch of their otherwise naked forms. Their limbs were as elongated as their torsos, topped off by fearsome knife-like claws. Indeed, it was the man-beast's face that shook me, and have thus adhered most to my poor mind. Each of them was different, yet equally as horrible. One of them, presumably the leader by its frame and command over the others, was snout-like, though more ursine in nature than its companions. It was not as natural as a bear, however, the tip of its snout curling inward in a grotesque manner, and I realized it was smiling at me. Unlike the others, its eyes were fiery, amber blazes that seemed to carry within them a tragic brew of pain and fury. It carried in its furry hand a gnarled stave that stood nearly as high as its bushy head and as solid around its forearms. Carved with the strange sigils and symbols, I made my fading mind spin deeper into madness with every passing second. Of course, the blood loss from the gash of my own arm wasn't helping. All the while, those eyes stared fixedly at my own, very mortal ones. The faces of the others were far more canine or cat-like, yet all held the same malformed grins as they calmly approached their prey. I noticed to my further dismay that, though I'd successfully blown multiple gaping holes in both their chieftain and their female cat beast on the right, those wounds were fast healing. Lord knows if the shots had even slowed them down. When they were within a few feet of me, and I was prepared to make my final futile stand, after pissing myself in terror and making whatever peace with God I could muster, the chieftain held out its arm, grasping the eldritch staff. Obeying their leader, its charges promptly stopped mid-stride and dropped to all fours, crouching as their respective natural animals would have. As he crossed those final steps between us, the truth, at least some of it, of what these things were, came to light under the rays of the moon. Still wearing that abhorrent smile, with each step, the creature morphed before my gaze. The dark brown fur covering it from snoot to foot shed, its snarling animalistic visage changing back into that of a racially undefined but hateful-eyed man. His tapered claws shifted back into thick human nails, muscles twisted, bones cracked, and limbs retracted, until the beast had become a man once more. He wore a leather loincloth, and still held that terrible stave, whose sigils I now saw matched those of the deep emerald and wood blue painted on its face and legs and chest. The beast-turned-man was now so close that I could almost taste his coppery breath as he lowered his head to meet my own, those amber blazes of eyes boring into my soul. Trembling, I couldn't even scream or beg for mercy as the fear gripped me so tight. With a movement that surpassed the quickness of any athlete, he grasped the side of my skull with his rough, meaty hand. Visions assaulted me of explorers and campers, both present and far past, being stalked and toyed with before being ritualistically butchered and consumed in the name of a long-forgotten deity. Visions of treaties made then broken, warnings unheeded, and finally of the brutal consequences that followed, all of which strove to shatter my already fragile psyche. Believing then that I was doomed, I shut my eyes in desperation, hoping that I could conjure up any other image in my mind's eye before meeting my creator that wasn't these abominations. The last thing I remember before waking with a start in the local hospital, a brunette-haired and crooked-hatted ranger sitting at my bedside, was the chieftain whispering something. "What?" I croaked, my throat as raspy as a lifelong smoker's. The ranger, Mia, twitched into consciousness, her half-asleep state broken. Here, just sip this, slowly now," she said, softly guiding a straw to my lips. As the cool water trickled down my throat and gave me new life, I smiled up at her. "Guess I should have stayed on the trail, huh?" I joked with a painful grin. Mia shook her head, matching my sardonic expression, her great raven mane rippling like inky waves. "I won't bother saying I told you so now. I'll save that for our coffee date." Even feeling like I had crawled out of perdition itself, my eyes lit up at the words. "I'll, pick you up at 8. Just got a couple of things I gotta take care of first, huh?" She let out a giggle that had some of the nurses rolling their eyes. I'll say. But weird thing is, even though we found your mangled campsite, the hiker that radioed us yesterday morning found you on the main trail a mile east. Like you just laid down and slept there, she said, turning her back to refill the cup. You wouldn't happen to, recall how you got there, or what happened before, would you? Very weird. Yeah, I don't really remember what... I started to reply before I looked up at her. Mia suddenly had an intense expression on her olive-hued face that had not been there a second ago. Nothing? Nothing about the animal attack? She said pointedly. Something about her abrupt change told me that I shouldn't answer. The whole ordeal was more akin to a nightmare than reality in any case, and part of me just wanted to compartmentalize the whole shit show up to some kind of natural explanation. Maybe I'd just foraged the wrong mushrooms or went into an acute psychiatric episode out there. Really, I just wanted to move on, as I'd already done with so much in my life, that I gave Mia the answer she and I both needed. Nah, not really, I said, shaking my numb head. Only that someone out there sure as hell is looking out for my stupid self. Mia dropped that fervent look as swiftly as it had risen, giving me another of her warm smiles that validated the voice telling me to sequester what another voice was screaming was the truth. She gave my hand a squeeze and moved again to get the cup. You know, Carl, I like you because you have a genuine love and, more importantly, respect for this land. There are so many people, past and present, who think they do, but they have no idea whatsoever. You know, some jackasses are even doing those stupid heart carvings over ancient cave drawings. She turned back and placed the cup in my hands before sliding me a piece of paper with a phone number. I took both and with a shrug said, "Guess it's just how I was raised, and see you soon?" "I hope so," she said, with her usual pepperiness, before turning to head out. Still, if more people had a little bit of respect, maybe fewer fools would go missing, and less pristine land would disappear with each passing year. Hell if I could argue with that, and said as much before waving her goodbye. She turned around once more before pushing through the exit. "Just remember, Carl, next time stay on the damn trail. Your guardian angel might not have as much pull as you think she does." As she left, I lay my head back down on the hospital bed. I could have sworn on anything that I saw a faint but fiery glint of amber when she winked at me. Did I see that? Or was it just simply the glow of the sunset mixing with the discolored hospital lights? I shoved that thought also into the recesses of my mind, resolving to stay as balanced as my will would allow. I was safe now, healing up, and even had my first real date in a while to look forward to. Mia had also taken the liberty of getting me a few personal items, my laptop included. Plus, I had pretty damn near majestic view of the hills from my window. Life could be worse. Still, a voice that wasn't quite mine kept whispering a singular, repeated promise, threatening to undo that threadbare sanity. When the earth is sick, its guardians will emerge to heal it.